Father Taras Kchik is a Redemptorist priest based in the Ukraine. The Redemptorists are a religious congregation who work with people on the margins of church and society. Welcome, Father Kchik.
Thank you, and thank you for having us and for giving us this platform to speak.
Oh, we're very much in solidarity. As you may know, Common Home TV itself is a Redemptorist apostolate, so we're very much feeling for you and for everybody in the Ukraine right now against the Russian aggression. So we've seen right now so many images of the more than 4.5 million refugees who have fled the Ukraine for safety to neighboring countries and beyond. But there's also the issue of internally displaced people. Can you tell us a little bit about St. Joseph's Monastery and how you're caring for the internally dispossessed? And are you still receiving people, or is that slowed down? Where are we at this point?
St. Joseph's Monastery was actually uniquely in a very good position to accept refugees, since we have a retreat house as well as a kindergarten as part of our monastery. And so the retreat house immediately was transferred into rooms for refugees where they could some spend the night and then move on overseas or to other cities, whereas others have been with us almost since the very beginning. We've also converted part of the kindergarten into also a place where we can house refugees. We've converted a lot of the rooms that we've had for other uses into refugees living quarters. There have been people coming here from the very beginning, including one orphanage, a foster home with over 10 children. And just yesterday evening, another foster family with 10 children has arrived. The first one was luckily able to move overseas, whereas the second one has been with us from the very beginning, since there are some guardianship issues and they can't actually take the children overseas. As well as that, we just have a number of refugees who at any point can come in. Some have stayed, some have moved on, and there's always new faces, new people coming in. We have been caring for them since the first days, and will continue to care for anyone who needs a place to stay.
You mentioned sorry to cut you off, but you mentioned the transitory nature. Is there people that what would make somebody stay rather than continue on to another country? What's the impediment there for leaving, or does everybody, or most people using it as a stepping stone to get to a safer place in continental Europe?
Some people are using our monastery as a stepping stone, and we've been happy to provide that where it's needed. But there are many reasons for staying. Firstly, there are those, even our monastery in Chernihiv, a city which has been under siege for a lot of the war. Our monastery stayed there, and actually during one of the interview, when someone asked me if the priests there are thinking about leaving already, and the day before I had a conversation with the provincial where I had volunteered if they were doing a rotation so the priest there could have a bit of a break. And he told me that the list is so long he wouldn't even remember to put me on it. And if I could write him in a messenger so that he would remember to add my name to a list, but he says, you're not going to go there anytime soon. Just the list is so long for people who want to go to that front to help those people. Why are we staying there? Because there are some who can't leave. There's those with young infants who sometimes can't get out, the infirm, the elderly. Those people are trapped, and as long as there are people there, we as Redemptorists will also never leave those people behind. We are more than willing to go there to those worst locations to be with those people who need us the most. The Redemptorist charism is to be with those who are most abandoned, who need us the most. We have such great examples from our history, from the Redemptorists of the past, from our martyrs, that it pulls us towards those places. What provokes other people to stay? Firstly, there's those who can't leave. Even that the orphanage that came and is continuing to live with us, there are certain legal reasons why they can't take those children overseas. There's parental rights and guardianships which are still in the courts that don't allow them to leave. There's also the question of what they would do if they would leave. For some people, they understand that as soon as they go overseas, they don't know the language, they don't have family, they don't know what type of support will be offered. Perhaps they'll be able to be accepted there for a short time, but long term, how can they support themselves? And more people are realizing that this might end up being a long-term situation, that it's not something that's going to be over in a few weeks or a few months. This might drag on, and how will they support themselves overseas? How will they support their children? Is this a situation where they're taking their children there to be safe, only to have their children taken from them because they don't have the means to support them?
Well, I think that leads into my question about family. So the family unit, the disruption between men going to the front, women staying back with children and rearing. But even there, that can be sketchy if there's people injured or dead. It leaves roles sort of changing. The average child or teenager isn't usually accustomed. And how are they adapting to that? And speak a bit maybe to that resilience, if you know any examples.
I think that one of the best examples was that orphanage that is staying with us. As soon as they arrived, the youngest children, and there were very young children with them. There was one child that was, I believe, 3 months old, and they were from Kharkiv, a city which has been bombed and destroyed, and they had been en route to us for over 4 days. And here these children finally arrive at our monastery. The little children are taken up to the kindergarten, to rooms which we had prepared as best we could. And the oldest kids among them go look at the younger kids, go make sure our stuff gets to some sort of room, and they run off to be with the little kids to make sure that they're adapting all right, to make sure to help calm them down in this new place. So even in this orphanage, the older kids, their first concern was to make sure that those youngest children were all right. They weren't concerned about themselves. They weren't concerned about the few bags they had, which was at that point all their worldly possessions. They wanted to make sure that those littlest children were doing okay and weren't crying at that moment. It was truly touching to see how these children really took care of each other, how much they cared. And there was an unfortunate moment where soon afterwards, we had to let the youngest children be taken over to a special facility, which is an orphanage for these toddlers, because we don't have the facility, we don't have the capability to look after them, round the clock.
Yeah.
And to see how much that hurt those older ones to say goodbye to those youngest children, to realize that there were brothers and sisters being split up, but they needed to be split up so we could care for all of them. It hurt them, yet at the same time, they were willing to give them up because their first concern was that their little brother or little sister was being taken care of properly.
I guess my next question is the taking care of and the safeguarding element. It can't be no one that's not living it could ever have any sort of insight into the speed in which this aggression and the absolute magnitude of the devastation of this aggression against the Ukraine. But as it goes on, the ideas of safeguarding these children. So if you see sometimes some of the most horrific, I mean, there's just so much tragedy and so much eye-welling looking and hearing any of this. But some of the people that go across the border to Poland, and there's sketchy people, men just waiting to pick up some of these single women. So the idea of safeguarding and making sure that there's a safety even within the confines of a place that's supposed to be a safe place. Has there been discussion about how to better facilitate something like this? How to build a place to fortify so that these type of things don't become a problem?
We do see the problems, and we have been discussing about it, but like you mentioned, the speed of everything happening, there just hasn't been time to react yet. And unfortunately, with the lack of oversight, there has been a lot of misuse and misinformation and abuse of this system. All too often, people knowing that I'm from overseas have asked me if I could give any advice, any help. And the first thing I always say is, don't go anywhere until you have written down on paper certain conditions, certain things. All too often, people are going overseas to lots of promises and then showing up and realizing that a lot of it was just empty promises, that they're being taken care of for a short while, and then they're being left on their own with no documentation, without any work visas, and then told that they have to provide for themselves. And the Ukrainian hryvnia, which they have with them, which is not a strong economy, quickly runs out. And then how do you take care of your family, which you have taken over there just to keep them safe? What do you do next? Now more and more we're seeing people actually come back, those who can get back, because they understand there's nothing there for them. There's no real support, and the support was very temporary, and as soon as it ran out, they had no way of surviving there.
Mhm. Well,
again, that's in the better situations. Unfortunately, there are worse situations with predators preying on these people who are helpless and in need.
Well, this is all, like I said, this is, this is such a nascent phenomenon, this war. Like you must be yourself hearing the church bells ring out as air sirens. That's got to be a total head trip to be hearing something that is, bells to the Lord being turned into these things that make people sort of, cower in fear. And we're still in the initial shock phase, but how have you seen from the beginning of the invasion till now a change in people's understanding that this might, like you said, might be a protracted, prolonged type of engagement?
There has been a definite switch from, all we need to do is last this out for a few weeks, to that realization that this might take longer. People, again, a big show of this is the fact our church, though we're not a bomb shelter, we are being used as a shelter, so people can gather in our basement, which is at least covered underground and at least something. But more and more people are not reacting to the sirens. Unfortunately, it's becoming more and more commonplace that it's just another air raid siren. It's just another attack on one of our cities. People are starting to get used to that, which is, I think, very dangerous for us, because as soon as you start getting used to that, firstly, we can only guess at how psychologically scarring that will be, but also the fact that when the attack does come to our city, we won't be so ready because we've gotten so used to the sirens going off a few times every day. But then there's the positive side where people are starting to reopen businesses. People are starting to go to work again, which might seem silly, but it is important. I mean, with our soldiers fighting at the front, we do need the economy to keep moving. We do need to have them something to come, have them have a home to come back to. And we also need to produce things to even help them. While in that crisis mode for those first few weeks, almost everything closed down. A country can't survive like that. We were starting to run out of supplies. Of course, some supplies are difficult, if not impossible to get, but slowly businesses are opening. New routes for supplies are starting to open up. Supermarkets are starting to get not everything back, but starting to slowly get more and more produce back, because there was a time where if you went to the store, you'd be lucky if a fourth or even a fifth of the shelves had food on it. And that is a very troubling thought.
During the annexation of Crimea in 2014, there were, again, people coming one way to get away from what the Russians were doing in that area, but there were communities coming the other way, coming east, and the Redemptorists were part of that. Can you speak to a little bit of that?
In our Ukrainian Greek Catholic rite, there is married priesthood. In fact, I'd say the majority of priests are either married or in the monastic and religious orders. And so a lot of the priests in Crimea who happen to be married wanted to take their families to safety. And so Crimea, for a certain time, was left almost without any priests. At that time, the bishop there asked, who is actually also a Redemptorist, asked for the religious orders to step up and to take over parishes. Our priests were among the first to go there. There were Basilians, Studites, and Redemptorists, each taking a third of Crimea. At this point, we are the only ones who are still there and will continue to be there. We took over, kind of joined a few of the parishes together and have been serving the people who, again, even though a lot of people were deported there, even though a lot of people were brought in, there were some older people, some infirm people who couldn't leave, who are still there from when Crimea was in Ukrainian hands and who need our support, who needed some sort of spiritual guidance, and who just needed to know that they were not being forgotten, that we were there with them. And so we were there and we continue to be there. I think the greatest example of this is, not the example, but the greatest example that those who went there took was our Belgian fathers, the Belgians who started the Ukraine Greek Catholic Redemptorists, because they were asked to work with Ukrainians when no one else could. And these were people who, at those ancient days when you still had to travel between Europe and North America by ship, made that trip many times before they could even learn the right language to communicate with their future parishioners, who some of them were given the ultimatum that if you go over to the Greek Catholics, you'll never be able to celebrate in your home or natural Roman Catholic rite again. And they accepted that, knowing that these people needed them more.
Mm.
And when we are given that example of what led to our province, it's hard to say that we would not go to someone who needed us right now.
You mentioned the rite of the Catholic Church that you're in. Some might not know that the Roman Catholic Church is not just Roman Catholic. Roman Catholic is one of many rites that that profess the same faith. But the majority of Ukrainians are Orthodox, and the recent statements made by Patriarch Kirill on this invasion, giving it more than tacit support. What's the reaction from the Orthodox that you know, or the backlash, that what must be overwhelmingly, vehemently anger at such statements?
Of course. Well, we have to remember that the Orthodox Church isn't one united church always, that they have their patriarchs and they're divided as well. And so in Ukraine, very recently, there was a new Ukrainian Orthodox Church formed, which united all the splintered Orthodox that didn't have a patriarch under one Ukrainian patriarch. So now there are two Orthodox churches within Ukraine, those that follow the Ukrainian patriarch and those who continue to follow the Russian patriarch. And of course, I think now we see even more what their politics have been like from the beginning. We see what we've always warned people about coming out more and more openly. The ones who follow the Ukrainian patriarch have been very open in throwing away what this has been, in judging this, in proclaiming that they are against this, and have often reached out to us with common prayers, with common services, versus those under the Moscow Patriarch, which for the longest time stayed quiet in hopes of not being asked, and then more and more have started openly supporting the horrible things that are happening in Ukraine right now.
And signs of solidarity then, like, so within this time of war, there's signs of solidarity that I see online. I follow people like Father Jerry O'Connor and Serve, and the great work that they do. Can you talk a little bit more about how different communities, different places support your work, and how we could do something to, how we can do more than just, for lack of a better word, do slacktivism and try to participate? Like, what do you suggest?
There has been a great outpour of support, especially from the Redemptorists from different provinces. Our community at St. Joseph's was always a very active community, even though we only have 4 active priests, 2 retired priests, and 1 brother. We had a kindergarten, a cafe, a retreat house, multiple programs, a bakery, and this time of war, we have continued to use the bakery to provide food for the locals, as well as provide, we bake over 200 loaves of bread every 3 days for the shelters with refugees in the city. The retreat house has been converted into a shelter for refugees. The church basement has become a shelter. A lot of we have a Faith and Light, which is special needs children we work with. Currently, we don't have a program with them, so we have converted their workshop into nets that our parishioners are using their free time to make for camouflage to send to the front. We are sewing med kits for our soldiers. So there's a lot of work being done, but of course, we do need support. Those same med kits, we need medicines to put in them. We can sew the med kit, we can get certain medicines here, but a lot of medicines has run out, and without Western supply, we can't really get it very often. And the support we've received from other provinces, here in our monastery in particular, from the Spanish province and from Ireland, has been, there was a moment where I asked, what's our condition on flour? And the spirit just said, we're making the 200 loaves today, so tomorrow maybe we have 3 tiny little bags of flour, and that's it. And luckily that was exactly when the Spanish shipment came in with over a ton of flour. So, but we're living day to day on some supplies, and this type of support, the outpouring of solidarity and brotherhood has kept us going, has even a lot of times psychologically, sometimes it's rough, and it's nice to know that someone's still out there and cares and just wants to say hello. And
on behalf of everybody at Common Home TV in the province of Oceania, you know that that's something that's happening daily throughout the province, that you're definitely not forgotten, and definitely in prayer and thought of. And I know that whatever we can do, we're trying to do. And it's within that I asked my final question. And if the answer is impossible, then maybe in this dark time it is impossible. But how do you see, if you see any, is there anything that you can point to that speaks to hope?
I do see hope. I see hope. Very often, if you look at the big picture, you don't see it. Because on the big picture, you start seeing statistics. You start seeing how many people have died. You start hearing of which territories are being lost every day. But I see hope in the little things. In the way some of the refugees have started sending their children to our kindergarten, and how the kids are adapting and getting along and starting to smile and laugh again. In the way the orphanage living here is time to time just saying how much they appreciate it. Or at times when I'm busy, one of them might come up and go, "We haven't seen you in a long time. When are we going to get to do something together again?" And these little moments of just seeing children have their childhood again, that gives me a lot of hope. These little moments of seeing people helping. Again, I mentioned all the volunteers doing different things, of the nets, of making power bars. They cook, homemade power bars to cut up and to give to the soldiers, to sort through all the humanitarian aid we're getting so we can send it to the front faster. And seeing like members of our youth group who will come in and say, because all education is online right now, they can't actually go to classes, so they're doing online education and saying, our teachers told us we have 2 classes off, so we got an hour and a half. Is there anything we live nearby? Is there any way we can help? Tell us where to go, what to do. Just coming in these tiny breaks they have during their days and looking to help weave those nets or bake those power bars just so they could do something to help someone. That gives me so much hope for a better future.
Well, again, we'd like to thank you so much for taking the time, and I know how busy you are, and with infants and orphans arriving every day, just remember that you're always in our thoughts and prayers. So thanks again.
Thank you for your prayers and for your continued support.
Here's the one with the 2 generators in it. God bless. God bless. All the best. Bye-bye.